Hi there, my name is Pat Fader, and I want to talk about the virtual machines that we are going to use in ITNET-112 and 111. If you look at this diagram here, you can tell that what it's showing us is that we have 5 virtual machines that we're going to use in ITNET-112, and odds are we'll use the same ones in ITNET-111. But we see here that we have 2 VMs called Server 2012-1, Server 2012-2. The blue bubbles indicate snapshots, so these 2 servers have at this point 4 snapshots, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you read from left to right, that's how those snapshots were created. So we took server 2012-1, made a new machine, did a server install, took a snapshot. We installed Active Directory, took a snapshot. At that point, we created some OUs, created a snapshot. We then rolled back to the AD install snapshot, installed Hyper-V, and took another snapshot. So anyways, that's what we're seeing here. Additionally, the green bubbles indicate the labs that rely on those snapshots. So let's take a look. If you're in either 112 or 111, you're going to need to get our virtual machines. So what we see here on my USB drive is I copied the content off one of our lab computers. Now odds are what you're seeing here is going to change a little bit by the start of the semester because we're creating additional snapshots and perhaps a little bit more files in these folders here. But anyways, you're getting the general idea. So I copied the folder off one of our lab machines. You see 2 subfolders, ISO installers and lab files. ISOs and installers basically contains the ISOs that we use to create the virtual machines in our labs. So you can look at the 3 that I have right now. I have a Windows 7 Professional ISO, Server 2012 R2, and then a Server 2012. In the R2, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but basically Microsoft released Server 2012 first. A little bit later down the road, they made some improvements, added some additional features, and then released Server 2012 R2. They did the same thing in Server 2008 as well. There's a 2008 and a 2008 R2. If you want more info, you can just Google that. The X64 means it's a 64-bit OS. Beginning of Server 2008 R2, Microsoft only released 64-bit server operating systems. And conversely, if I look at my Windows 7 Professional ISO, we see that the x86 indicates it's actually a 32-bit operating system. So we have a 32-bit Windows 7 Professional and 64-bit server ISOs. And all that an ISO is, I always think of it as like being like a zip file of an entire DVD. So we took the Server 2012 R2 DVD, we compressed the folder structure on the files into a single file, a zip file, and now it's our ISO. So that's kind of what it's like. Alright, so that's the ISOs folder. Now the lab files folder, you can see that we have a folder for 110, and we also have one currently for ITNET-112 based on Server 2012. And again, depending on where you get your images from, you might see different additional subfolders, but for ITNET-112, this is the subfolder that you want to copy. And I think it'll be the same for ITNET-111 as well, same folder. If I open up ITNET-112, you'll see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 subfolders. Each one of these is a virtual machine, and that directly maps to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 VMs here as well. Alright, we're going to take a look at the VM SC3 real quick. So I already have VMware Workstation running. I already actually have it loaded. Let me add, if you take a look here, I made a folder called ITNET-112. In Workstation, you can make folders pretty easily. Just right click and say new folder. And then it's easier to put your VMs in there. I'm going to add one more here. So let's see here. I'll just so you can see how you do it. New virtual machine, or rather open. File open. Let me browse to where my VMs are. I'm going to open the VMX file. That's what VMware uses. That's kind of the VMX file actually is what stores all these settings here that you see on the right. And that's what the VMX contains. Oops, let's drag it over here. It just if you're taking multiple courses, you'll start getting your VMs confused. That's why I like putting them in folders. Let me add one more. All right. ITNET-112, server 2012-2, there it is. Okay. I have my servers. This SC3 is kind of boring, but we'll start with that one. If I go to SC3 and if I go look at our snapshots, you'll see that we only have one snapshot. New server VM. So let me go there. Okay. I'll do the same thing on SC4 real quick. There we go. If I jump back to our diagram real quick, you'll see that for SC3 and SC4, there's a single snapshot called new server VM, and the description here on the right, or in the legend here, empty VM with no OS installed. So it's a shell of a virtual machine. There's no operating system. If I go back to SC3, if I look, well, let's look at SC4 real quick. I think here. This is great. SC4. Remember, it's a shell of a machine, and we see that the DVD. There's actually nothing. I don't see any configuration on the DVD. If I double click it, and DVD, it says connect, use a physical drive. I want to use an ISO image. If I just start up SC4 right now, oops, start it up. It's going to boot up. There's no OS on the hard drive. There's also no OS. There's nothing in the DVD-ROM drive, so it's going to boot up and just kind of sit there. Eventually, it'll say no OS found. So let me just turn this off. VM power off. Powered off. All right. I'm going to stick with SC4. We'll skip SC3. Now what I want to do, just to kind of illustrate an ISO, I'll take the DVD and I will map it to our ITNET. Keep going back into our ISOs, into our server 2012 R2 ISO. There it is. Now when I boot up, I'll boot up off the DVD. Also, if I look at the settings here, you'll notice that I have 2 gigabytes of RAM allocated for this virtual machine. This might be too much depending on what kind of host computer you're operating on. If we take a look at my pathetically underpowered home system where I'm recording this, I have 4 gigabytes of RAM. That's bad. Well, it's not bad, but it's the bare minimum. So with 4 gigabytes of RAM, if I'm going to run one VM, fine, I can give it 2 gigabytes. If I'm going to run 2, let's say I want to boot up SC3 and SC4, I better dial these. I better dial these machines down to 1024 megabytes or 1 gigabyte each. Otherwise, when they start up, they will really tax my home system here. So that's something that you're going to have to look at on your home system if you're running these at home and figure out how much RAM you can allocate your VMs. If you're an individual that has 8 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of RAM at home, 2 gigabytes for your VMs is just fine. Beyond that, you're not going to see much of a performance improvement. So now, if I boot up, oh, incidentally, I copied this, from the MATC lab, and this path is probably not valid. Odds are that the ISO path at MATC is different than what I have at home. So if I wanted to map this to my server CD, DVD, the ISO, I'd want to go back and kind of reconfigure that. There we go. Okay. One last thing. The good protocol is before you ever start a lab, you always want to reset your snapshot. So just remember, I've got this configured to 1 gigabyte, and I've configured my DVD settings here. If I take SC3 and go back to our snapshot manager and roll back to the new server VM, yes, I just lost my memory settings and you can just tell by looking, my memory got changed back and my CD DVD thing got mapped back. So the takeaway is, in a snapshot, in addition to keeping track of your operating system, also manages all your device settings as well. So let's keep that in mind. Okay. And if you believe me, now when we boot up our machine here, kind of holding my breath. Last time I did this, my system hung. I think that's because, oops, let's look at our settings. Oh, I forgot that I've just rolled my snapshot back. So let me power this machine off. Power off. Okay, let's try SC4. That's got the correct ISO mapping and the proper RAM settings. Booting up, and you'll notice all of a sudden now it's booting up off my server DVD. So if I let it go, it eventually would take us to the installation screen or menu, and we'd proceed with a server 2012 installation. I'm done with this part of the demo, so let's just turn it off. Power off. Good. Okay. So I've talked about, I briefly kind of talked about our VMs. I've talked about snapshots. I've described what the legend, what's depicted here. We're going to look at a lab real quick, just run through a practical run through of a lab, or just the beginning part of it. The other item that I didn't mention is if I go back and look at our, let's look at, for just a change, let's look at 2012-1. Okay, so I've got 2 gigabytes RAM, obviously. Like I mentioned, if I'm going to run this at home here, well, here, before I do anything, I have to pick a snapshot. I'll go to snapshot 4. Just here, I'll go to, let's see here, 80 installed. Good enough. And I will change my, now that I've changed the snapshot, I will go to my RAM setting. Okay. The last thing I want to look at on my VM settings, I've looked at the memory, I've looked at the ISO if necessary, which actually, like at this point, it doesn't matter. Once you've gotten past, if you're not using the new server VM snapshot, all of these have an OS installed, so you really don't need the DVD mapped to your machine's DVD-ROM drive, or the ISO mapped to your machine's ROM drive. Okay. The last thing, maybe just for troubleshooting, I'm showing this right now, but if I look at my network adapter, it says host only. If I want this server to be able to communicate with the other machines, I would want to verify that, in fact, they're also on the host only network. Host only. Look at Windows 7, host only. Yeah, you get the idea. Okay. We're gonna, I think this should be helpful. We'll just take a look at my syllabus real quick. And I realize that if you're in a different class, your syllabus might look a little different, but the idea is the same. So, you know, let's say you're tooling along in the semester, and here you go. You get into Active Directory, and you're getting ready to do Lab 4, AD troubleshooting. Okay, so let's just take a look at the lab real quick. All of our labs will follow a similar format. So we're running our troubleshooting lab, and at the beginning of the lab we see a network diagram. If I can go to web view here, let's see here. Make it a little smaller. It's not going to help us. All right. I might need to change a link. There's a part of this is getting truncated, and it deals whether the link was mapped to a page view or a web view, but I'll deal with that later. Okay, so at the beginning of the lab, here's the topology that we're assuming, and if you notice, we've got 2 servers, and server 2012-2 is getting chopped off on us a little bit here, and the network diagram reflects IP addresses, machine names. You'll notice the machine name for server 2012-1 and 2 is like a longer name. It's a fully qualified domain name. It's the machine name followed by your domain name. The Windows 7 machine is just a machine name. There's no domain name at the end of it, just Win 7, and that's because this machine here hasn't yet joined our domain. Once it joins the domain, we would see that name change. But anyways, when you run the AD troubleshooting lab, this is the assumed topology that you're working with, And if we scroll down a little bit, it says under required materials, it tells us what VMs we're going to use, and then also what snapshot to roll those machines back to. So I need to run two VMs, 2012-1, 2012-2, snapshot AD installed. So, to kind of beat something to death here, I'd have to go to 2012-1, VM snapshot manager, AD installed, go to it, yes. Go to machine 2012-2, VM snapshot manager, AD installed, it's right there, or I can pick it this way as well. If you go to the snapshot manager, it kind of gives you, it shows you the whole sequence of snapshots. If you were paying attention and more observant than myself, you'd say, oh, wait a second, Fader, how come this diagram here shows 1, 2, 3, 4 snapshots, and the snapshot manager just showed me 3 a second ago? Well, that's because the VMs I'm creating the screencast with are a little older, and they don't include this Hyper-V installed snapshot. Otherwise, you would have seen it on the previous screen that we were looking at. Okay, so both of my machines are at the AD installed snapshot. At this point, I would say, okay, I'm running a underpowered computer, so let's just dial the RAM back a little bit. You can play with those settings a little bit depending on your home system and depending on your video card, whether the RAM's built into your system memory or there's a dedicated video card. You could perhaps, as opposed to giving your host computer 2 gigabytes and just using your remaining, I'm assuming you have, well, there's a lot of things that go into this. When we look at your computer's amount of free memory, since I have a 64-bit operating system, I see 4 gigabytes of RAM. If I had a 32-bit OS, I would, if I had 4 gigabytes of memory sticks, I'd see still like 3.3 gigabytes. And the reason for that is it's a 64-bit versus 32-bit issue. But anyways, I'm looking at my amount of free RAM, and I have decided that I'm going to give 2 gigabytes to the host, so I've got 2 gigabytes to play with, so then it's up to me to see how I want to allocate that amount of memory. So I've configured my RAM, I've configured my snapshots, and at this point I just fire the machine up and I start my lab. Let's go back and take a look at that lab again. Okay, these links should work here. But it basically says you'll start up your domain controller. Once it's up, log in, create some users, and I can just walk through, and this lab should work just fine. I love this because by having a snapshot, you remove any question about what you may have done or what you may have messed up in a previous lab. That's why at the start of every one of our labs, we're having you just take your machines back to a known state or a snapshot. Some labs require, most labs will use Server 2012 1 and 2. Other ones, as indicated in that previous network diagram, other labs like Lab 5, for example, it uses the Windows 7 machine. I see Lab 5 down here, and the snapshot would be clean install. And for my servers, Lab 5, it would be the AD install. So this, you won't need to look at this network diagram or this diagram during the semester, and that's because if we look at Lab 5, at the beginning, we tell you exactly how to manipulate your machines, what snapshot to roll them back to. And in this activity, in addition to a network topology, we're also kind of showing you, logically, like what your AD structure should look like as well. This will make more sense as you go through the class. So I hope this was helpful. I'm really excited about how we're doing labs this year. In the past, we used a textbook, and the problem with that was I think students had too much information. Because as you know, we've always used lab sims in our Microsoft classes, which is a great resource. They have great video training, great simulations. And then on top of that, we would expose students to CBT Nuggets, which is another phenomenal video resource to complement what's going on in the lab sim. But prior to this semester, we also had the students buy a textbook. So it's almost like you had 3 major sources of information: textbook, lab sim, and CBT Nuggets. And we use the labs out of the textbook, and then most of the times the labs, we had problems with the labs, we had to rewrite them. So this year what we did, we said, you know what, let's skip the textbook, let's save the students a few bucks, and let's use the Nuggets and the lab sim, and let's write our own labs. And these labs should track closely to what you're learning in the lab sim and in the CBT Nuggets. And let me just show you something else real quick. we'll jump back to my syllabus if I can find it. Yeah, here's one. So as an example, and again, I realize if you're a different instructor, you might have a little bit different format, but we see from my online class here, during the second week of the semester, students should do this lab setup assignment. Students should watch Lab Sim 2.1 through 2.4, or do it. You know, obviously in the Lab Sims there's quizzes, there's simulations, and there's lecture component. They should also watch the following CBT nugget, and when all that's done, they should come and work on the lab. So that's in the lab complements what you've been exposed to in the Lab Sim and the nugget. So I hope you have a great semester. You're going to need to get down to campus to copy the labs or work with your instructor to somehow get a copy of our labs. And once you have those, you will be set and hopefully learn a lot with us. So thank you very much and have a great day.